You're welcome back. And to push our conversation on Good Morning Nigeria today on the implications of the recent inflation rates, let's take this backgrounder by Oyeyemi Ajayi.
Inflation is an economic concept that refers to the rate at which the general level of prices of goods and services rise, and subsequently purchasing power is falling. For some times now, rise in inflation has been the order of the day, with efforts to reduce it proving abortive. The consistent inflation in the country has continually become a source of worry to everyone, with both the rich and the poor not left out. General prices of commodities and even services are skyrocketing by the day, with no end in sight soon, as many say. The National Bureau of Statistics puts the country's inflation rate in May to 33.95%, with core index at 27.04%, aside food index pegged at 44.66%. Inflation rate is said to be the highest in Bauchi with 42.30% and lowest in Borno, 25.97%, as food inflation becomes highest in Kogi State with 46.32% and lowest in Adamawa State of 31.72%. It is known that unevenly rising prices inevitably reduce the purchasing power of some consumers, and this basically is the single biggest cost of inflation. Inflation can also distort purchasing power over time for recipients and payers of fixed interest rates. It can also be caused by a variety of factors, such as an increase in production cost, a decrease in the supply of money, or an increase in government spending. When the cost of goods and services goes up, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. Therefore, inflation reflects a reduction in the purchasing power of money. The prevailing high inflation in Nigeria is seriously affecting the value of money, which has reduced investment and the real GDP growth rate, with exchange rate on the high side. Of reality, many Nigerians now buy lesser quantities of consumables due to the prevailing high prices in the market. Nigerian producers are also feeling the pains of high prices as the cost of production has risen and have become so frustrating to contribute meaningfully to the national output. The prevailing situation in the manufacturing sector can worsen the inflation problem confronting the economy. Now, with all this, what is the implication of the recent inflation rate? What is the way out? What measures should be taken to ensure reduction in the inflation, and what are the roles of the people in these? Our guest will be answering these questions and more shortly.
Thank you, Oyeyemi Ajayi, for that background report. Now, joining us to discuss implication of the recent inflation rate, let me introduce in the studio to you Dr. Emeka Okengu. He's a development economist and a farmer. Dr. Okengu, you're welcome.
Pleasure. Privileged to be here. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, we're still expecting Yushao Aliyu, but Jumai, you can introduce the other guest.
Yes, still okay here with us in the studio is Adefolari Olamilekan. He's a political economist and development researcher. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thanks for having me.
My last guest, but not the least, is joining us via Zoom from Kaduna. Another regular is Professor Yushau Ango, Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship. He's also Deputy Vice Chancellor Academics, Kaduna State University. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Good morning.
Well, let's stay with Professor Yushau Ango, and let me start with this question. The current inflation rate in Nigeria is a bit complex issue, and with multiple factors contributing to it. In your view, what do you think are the major drivers of this inflation?
First of all, we have said it oftentimes here and elsewhere that the inflationary pressure or trend is a global phenomenon. Right from especially 2019, after the COVID, there was a lot of this pressure all over the world, culminating, for example, in the United States. They had to make an act, on the Inflation Control Act of 1922. So it is a global phenomenon, simply because at a point in time, the global economy was locked up. There wasn't any major economic activity taking place. Meanwhile, costs were piling up. And after that, there were the aftermath of it was, of course, it started to become a global issue. Secondly, of course, we know about conflicts all over the world, especially the Russian-Ukrainian one, which also has major impact, especially on food-related prices, because that is more like the food basket of the world. And when they are having crises like this, it affects every other thing. Now, but for us in Nigeria, we have, especially in the last 1 year, had major challenges, and some of those challenges have to do with especially introduction of so many reforms, and some of those reforms more or less came all at the same time. For example, of course, we all know about the removal of fuel subsidy. Removal of fuel subsidy naturally will affect costs, especially cost of transportation, and that adds to the cost of every other thing. And then, of course, subsequently, the merger of foreign exchange rates, trying to merge the autonomous sources with the official sources, that actually more or less tripled the rate which the Naira was at before. And then, of course, recently removal of subsidy as far as electricity consumption is concerned for a particular band. Now, all of these put together, and especially because of the way they came, because of the way they were implemented more or less in quick succession. We apparently did not plan effectively for all this. So all of these are the major drivers. Other than this, I don't think there was any major issue. Of course, we have some other issues, containing issues like for food security, or especially food availability or food prices. We know that there are challenges, in terms of many vast areas where ordinarily, agricultural production will take place, did not take place because of issues of security. Some of these have impact and effect. But I think largely, first it was global, then locally we implemented so many policies, and some of these policies now came to manifest in this, what we are seeing today.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll come back to you in the course of the program to elaborate more on what you said. And, in 2022, we had 18.85%, inflation. And now we have 33.95%, the longest since March 1996. And it has continued to rise for 17 months going on. So what are the measures? We've been talking about inflation all the while on Good Morning Nigeria. It continued to rise. So what are the measures that can be used to arrest this rising inflation? From the very foundation itself, so that we can begin to solve the problem.
Yes, I think let's look at the foundation.
Yes.
And then we'll now be able to now, against the foundation, begin to now, posit some measures. The primary foundation is that we are not productive as a country. Because every other thing that is around this matter of inflation is our dependence. When you're talking about the disruptions, the global disruptions, commodity disruptions, it is because we are depending on external sources, for some staple. Okay, in the case of the Ukrainian-Russian war, grains. Okay, in the case of the Gulf crisis, our, oil, greases, and gases. Now, the question will be, these are dependent on these commodities. Are they commodities that will have capacity, okay, to be able to produce locally? And if we're not able, if we do, then what is the problem? That should be the first question. Now, you come to the three major factors that we keep positing year in, year out. One, climate crisis, okay? the question will be, what adaptation, what mitigation strategies, national strategies have we put into place to be able to take care of that factor? 2 is the transportation, challenge. The question will be now, what plans, what programs have we as a country, put together to handle the after effects of the removal of the fuel subsidy, our over-dependence on subsidy? Okay, are there other solutions, that have made transportation a little cheaper? And then third will be the matter of, insecurity, which are the 3 major factors. And if you look at, the indicators, indices, there are 2 things that we bring that would rattle your mind. One is the rural inflation at 31%, and then the urban inflation at again 31%. So that tells you 2 things. One, there is no activity, in the village or in the rural areas where you have all our lands. 2, because there are no activities, there could be, some forced migration from the rural areas into the urban areas that is now creating again your urban inflationary trends. So you now have what you call a catch-22 situation, or between the hard, the rock and the hard place. Now, have I laid some foundation?
Yes.
So that we can now begin to now, prefer ideas. Now, the first thing we should ask, if the problem now is productivity and we are not producing anything, I saw you and Chudi, bantering before we came on set, and he said the problem was you, himself, and Ademola, and I include myself.
Yes, because you're wearing linen.
Yeah, and Chudi was very correct.
Yeah.
And to an extent, Haja, you were not so correct.
Who says?
I'll tell you why. Because everything a lot of us are wearing in this room, you'll be very, very surprised.
Yes.
Is products that we sell as byproducts of our crude, petrochemicals, practically everything. Now, turns again to our non-productivity. Even Ademola, that anybody will look at now and say, oh, definitely it has to be Yoruba. I got, one of those caps, and I wore it probably to my friend's wedding, my friend's son's wedding over the weekend. But you'll be surprised that material is from Pakistan or India, that Ademola has converted into, a Yoruba outfit. Ditto for yours, Haja. Ditto for my brother who is wearing, a jacket. And ditto for me, that I don't know what they call this now, safari or so, whatever. Point I'm trying to make, gentlemen and to Nigerians, is that our problem in this country that is driving our inflation is our inability to know that what is killing us is that we have hand and feet, we have brains, and all we sit every day is to discuss something, okay, that is actually within our reach to conquer. And as we drill down, let me give other people, I can now begin to give you practical examples of where those fault lines, of where those mistakes, of where those gaps, of what could have been done a long time ago that we're not doing, that we can begin to do today, and we can stop these inflationary, trends. That will be my opening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okengu there. Now let's get Ade Olamileko. Let's get your view on this issue. What do you think are the major drivers of inflation in this country?
I think for me, Prof and Doctor really to prove to us that these are the challenges that we have been facing that have been driving our inflation. And first steps from this productivity. I would like us to have a go back in memory lane to 1986. Something happened to our economic structure. We begin to buy into the ideas of neoliberal economic principles. That when Prof say we are not productive, deny us that sums of productivities, whereby we begin to focus on finance houses instead of industrial estate areas. Many of us will still remember how the military government then, carried out the policy of privatization and commercialization, that over 867 government-owned enterprises were abolished. That was the beginning of our deproductivity and de-industrialization of this economy of Nigeria. And that's why inflation continues. Although Prof made mention of global impact and our poor local initiative, I will hang it on 3 things. One is our monetary policies. fiscal policies as well as trade policies. Then the last one is, what are the state governors doing about inflation? Most of us are concentrated on federal government, particularly because federal government controls central bank, which use monetary policies to tighten money in circulation as a process of ensuring that they also fight inflation. But on the other way around, they end up aggravating inflation crisis in the country. Then the fiscal policies that are supposed to help us, as much as money that we are earning supposed to be used to cater for industrial purposes, development purposes, many of us cannot even account for money that has been spent. A modest history of what has been happening so far since 1999 will show that government have earned more either from crude or from non-oil sector. But how much of that money have gone into infrastructure development that would have aided what doctor was talking about productivities? He made mention of what nothing is happening in our villages. Many of us remember from our economic history perspective, whereby we talk about localization of industries. How many rural areas have localization of industry where we can pinpoint with the raw materials that are situated in each of the 724 local governments in Nigeria? Just recently, Nasarawa State government celebrated the establishment of lithium industry. That would have been celebrated over 30 years ago, not just yesterday or recently. But because of government focus has shifted, as I earlier pointed out, finance houses, whereby we now base our economy on just financial aspects, that it is through finance we can make our economy to grow. Meanwhile, it is through productivity that will make economy to, and productivity in terms of tangible product. I can rightly point out, he said I'm wearing suit. Yes, it was sewn by a Nigerian, but the material comes from where? I don't know, but it wasn't from Nigeria. So if we have done so much in terms of industrialization, productivity that he's talking about would have gained more and be able to address the issue of inflation. But another thing that I will quickly point before I let go is this. The monetary policy of the government, as swift as it is, as brilliant as it is, it doesn't address inflation in any way. Either you are increasing CPR, either you are increasing interest rate, either it doesn't, because they are not functional in relation to fiscal policy as well as trade policy. There is a disconnection. Now, the third aspect of what I mentioned was the state governors. Why is it that anytime we are talking about inflation, nobody questions state governors how their fiscal policy is addressing productivities in their state? Nobody asking them that question. But for me, our major concern is federal government, CBN, Minister of Finance. Now let's shift that focus to state governors. You are any NGA, you are collecting FAC, you are collecting. There are several money that are also getting, whether through World Bank or IMF, as a joint venture to carry out certain activities to be able to address productivity in their state. What are they doing with those money? So if we don't address some of these from this foundation that Dr. Abmen mentioned, which are now break down to what we can also understand, there's no way we can address inflation.
You have criticized the monetary policy and the fiscal policy of government not addressing the current challenges that we are facing. Exactly. So what adjustment would you recommend?
In terms of adjustment recommendation,
yes,
they are very practical. One of them is that over the years, CBN have always pursued aggressive, hawkish, tightening monetary policies. And what does that do? It has two sides of it. One, they say they want to ensure that they control inflation by ensuring that money doesn't flow too much into the hands of people. Because based on economic terminology, based on some economic definition, that when there is too money in circulation, it leads to too much money, chasing few goods. But on the other way around, when they now tighten that monetary policy, it's also stifling productivity. Where does those SMEs, big businesses, get the money from? Now you now increase interest rate. Then you also tighten liquidity ratio. You also tighten cash reserve ratio for banks. So where does that lead us to? Then the other aspect is fiscal policy that's supposed to aid the economy in terms of productivity. We have spent so much money when it comes to electricity generation that's supposed to aid industrialization, but up to now we are not yet enjoying that electricity as expected. So why would productivity comes in? Then we also aspect is this: we are also spending so much money on food production. I think the last time I saw the Minister of State for Agriculture here, he said they have spent over 309 billion on agriculture in 1 year of Tinubu government. And you see, ask yourself, where are the foods? Then when they came out, they said there was poor harvest that affect tomato production in the country. Meanwhile, government gives seed to tomato farmers. Government give them incentive. The same government will now discourage themselves not to buy that product for the consumption of the people. Now leave it open for anyhow people to go and buy the tomato. Then they hoard it and they create scarcity within that period. Although one of the things that were not made or mentioned about what is causing inflation, what is driving inflation, is the greed in our system, which Prof made mention of global tension and the rest of it. It comes from the background of capitalism. And Nigeria is a capitalist state and a great actor in capitalist, global capital environment. So the greed is here. So people are also taking advantage of creating inflation as a result of what they want to make profit. Let me not even mention of corporate organization that are also creating that opportunity for themselves, because very soon you start hearing billions of profit after tax. Then you ask yourself, in this same economy, people are declaring billions upon billions of profit after tax.
Oh.
Well, you know, when you talk about inflation, at times you get frustrated because these are things that Nigerians themselves can contribute to bring it down. And as individuals, the CBN policy is affecting even entrepreneurs who are trying to come up with businesses. Now let's join our Zoom, and Professor Yushau Ango is there. He's a professor of finance and entrepreneurship. You earlier talked about the global impact that is, you know, contributing to the rise in inflation here in Nigeria. Now, how does Nigerian inflation compare with other countries in, you know, in the region and globally? As we can see, there's a lot of applause for Argentina for bringing their inflation rate to 4.2%, you know, after cutting cabinet, you know, the cabinet by 50%, dropped presidential jet, you know, slashed public spending by 50%, and, you know, suspended public works contracts. So if this can be done in Argentina to bring down the inflation rate to such a low number, why can't we do it here?
No, nobody says we can't do it here. We can do it, obviously. Argentina's case is a very interesting case. They have been at it for so many years. Their economy has been in the doldrums for many years. So for them to have been able to do this, I believe is nothing that we cannot do. The only thing is that since maybe around 1913 or 14 here in Nigeria, the inflation rate has been in the double digits. Otherwise, before then it was single digit most times. So we can take steps. We can bring in policies that will actually ensure that we reverse this trend. The only thing that happens normally is that it doesn't happen just like that immediately. You know, it's a gradual process. The same way inflation gradually, that is also the same way we are going to manage it. There are a number of things we can do. Now, government, for example, there are things, of course, coping strategies for all of us, individuals, but then for government itself, which is driving the fiscal aspect of the economy and actually managing the monetary aspect as well, I think there are a number of things to do. Now, one of them certainly is to ensure that there is a reduction in, excessive expenditure in the economy. I think part of the problem, but part of what led to this was actually all of a sudden government found itself, because they have removed subsidy, the money that normally would have gone into subsidy now became available to state governments, to local governments, the federal government as well. Now, because of that availability, and I think many of them were not prepared for it, the expenditure, the spending, and mostly it was not spending, of course, it's not spending based on clearly earlier budgeted or developmentally inclined system. So government was just spending, more or less, I would say, on luxuries, on comfort of the government operatives. Now, in the process, so much money has come into the economy, and because it was not deliberately targeting where it will help, that is why we have this inflation. And then, of course, even for the exchange rate, we know that anytime there is pack, once there is money distributed, before you know it, the exchange rate will rise, because many government functionaries, probably at much lower levels, will now have a lot of money at their hands, and then they will approach the Bureau de Change people to just collect the money. So basically, we can manage, we can reverse this trend, and the way to reverse it, first, majorly, especially for government, is to reduce excessive expenditure. But they can invest in areas which will now help. For example, this issue of power, we have been at it for so long. I mean, if Africa, with about 60 million, with about 60 million population, has about 58,000 megawatts. You know, we cannot drive this economy with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 megawatts. It's not possible. So we do something, whatever it takes, to reverse this. We have to ensure that we are actually able to have a lot of this, and then we focus on developing our local capacity. Anything that we can produce locally, we shouldn't import. Now that will help. We should assist, you know, so whatever measures we need to take, we can take them in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. In the long term, we must ensure, and in the medium term, we must ensure that we feed ourselves. At least we continue to feed ourselves. Of course, we must buy something, and people buy things from us. We are feeding Nigeria, we're feeding most of our neighbors as well, but we must have that capacity. At least that will reduce the tendency of importing any food or food-related issues. So there are quite a number of things that we can do, but I have confidence that this situation is not something that cannot be reversed. And I believe there is light at the end of this tunnel as well. So we're optimistic. Just like Argentina achieved it, we can also achieve it. I'm sure we are going to.
Very much, Professor Ango, there. We are all optimistic. Just like other countries have achieved, it is possible for us to also achieve the same result and bring down inflation in this country. While you were talking, we had our other guest, Yushau Aliyu, an economist who has just joined us. Aliyu, you are welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, and good morning, Nigeria.
And we're talking about the implication of the recent inflation rates. So just let me allow you to rest a bit, but we'll come back to you immediately. I want to just have Dr. Kengu view on how does these inflation rates affect the what is called an average Nigerian now. Let's look at the implication of these inflation rates on an average Nigerian, and what are the implications on the standard of living in Nigeria right now?
Let me answer you idiomatically or rhetorically.
Or metaphorically.
Ademola, what would be the pain that a man who puts his hand inside a burning fire will feel? How do you begin to quantify it? Because you see, there are so many ways you can look at impact. You can look at it either from the physical you see, but there are also some underlying factors you do not see. The emotional, the loss of confidence. Okay, I hear about a story, a deputy director for that matter, in one of the agencies, who just died suddenly because the landlord was on him to pay rent and he couldn't pay the rent. And then he kept saying his head, and then he went to sleep and didn't wake up. Now, so how do you begin to now look at the impact of looking at your children and lying to them to say that their mother had gone to market to go and buy food when you know, truly, she's not coming with any food? So sometimes there are questions that don't have answers. And that's why I'm saying to you that what we have in Nigeria now is a situation, is for me like a doctor who has to tell a patient that he has end-stage cancer. Now, the way you relay that message, could be the make and mar of that treatment. Okay? For me, what I'm here to do is to say to you, all the indicators are bad. They are not going to change, anytime soon. Okay? So it is now for us to start looking at those things that we didn't do or that we can do that can be able to change the trajectory. And let me take you down memory lane. In 1986, there was a conference organized by Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. And at that point in time, the subcontracting model, a lot of companies have started exiting Nigeria. And the result of that conference led to the creation of a Raw Materials Research Development Council. Let me also tell you this. Man has 10 thematic areas. That agency has 10 departments, each tied to those thematic areas of man. Let me also say this to you publicly, that at the point in time we were having the monopoly of Kellogg's. If you remember Kellogg's cornflakes,
yes.
it was this agency, that the research agency outputs, that actually now supported, they worked with Nestle to begin to now produce the Nestle, complex. It was also this agency that led to the betting, of the Ministry of Solid Minerals, development today. Each time I come in here, I talk about this agency. Now, why would such an agency be obscure? And if you look at the laws that are establishing the agency, they insisted that whoever had to be the Director General of that agency had to be a scientist or an engineer that had 18 years cognate experience in raw materials research and output. So, you have, like I told you at the beginning of this program, to put it lightly, what we are looking for in Sokoto is inside our pocket. Now, what we have not done is to be able to now look inwards and say to ourselves, what did Argentina do? And you cannot compare us with Argentina, for crying out loud. Argentina is, I don't know, what's the population of Argentina? If you put 2-3 local governments together in Nigeria, you will get it. So when you say cut the size of governance, the constitution says every state of Nigeria must have a minister.
Yeah.
Except to change that constitution, you are going to be having a minimum of 36 ministers. Now, the constitution says there are going to be 109, members of the Senate. Ditto 360 members. Ditto MDAs. A lot of them, developed or established by acts of parliament. So it's easy to say cut public spending, cut this, cut that. But there's a flip side. If you stop expenditure on infrastructure, how do you now attract investments? So it's a catch-22 situation. But what is critical is that, do we have the carrying capacities to be able to climb out of this very easily and very quickly? The answer will be a resounding yes. And I'm talking out of institutional memory and experience. Each time I come in here and say to you, address me as a farmer, I am not the farmer that carries hoe and cutlass, demola. I keep daring you people. Come to my house. I didn't even say to my resource center. That might be taking it too far. If you come to my house during the times of harvesting of yam, I will harvest yam inside my house and give to you to take home. And sometimes
I will come.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Sometimes when I do it, I can show you videos on my phone. I'm dressed like this to go to work, and I do it so that I can encourage my children. I say to my wife, follow me. I go to one of my bags, dressed like this in white, cut open my yam bag in my house, lift up my yam. All I need to do is to wash my hands, get into my car and drive out. So it is all about us now using innovation to begin to now think a little properly. I keep telling you, Ademola, it's a little bit worrisome, that we have 333 dams in Nigeria, maybe a little more. Not one of them is applied to commercial fishing. Not one is applied. And we are importing 1.8 million metric tons of fish on an annual basis. And most of these dams are in areas where the poorest of the poor live. I'm not talking about irrigation now. We have a steel plant, that can be used to produce a minimum of 37 million greenhouses in a matter of months, that can be applied into desert agriculture where Hajia comes from. You can grow ugu in the heart of Maiduguri.
Yes.
You can. You can grow corn. In fact, there's a study that shows that even the better yield of palm oil and corn comes from the northern part than the southern part of the country. Now, but because you are not aggregating, first and foremost, the right human capital, to be able to now understand and think out your fiscal policy, like Lekon, my brother, has been trying so hard to emphasize, your trade policy, like he's been trying for us to all understand. And you have how many agencies, how many research institutes, how many programs of government? Not one of them is in any production of any kind. All of them are pilots. We've not been able to translate any of these things into something that is meaningful. So when you're talking about the impact on the ordinary Nigerians, I can say to you, the impact is like a man who has cancer and you're saying to him, God will heal you. There's no way you can be able to. But what that man can do is that you can actually give him proper care without prayer. I saw this story, I'm going to be ending on this. A transformer was burning. And some people gathered around the transformer and started casting and binding. And then they showed another place where a house was burning, I think somewhere in Singapore, and they had this crane, okay, that could in 3 minutes climb up to the 100th floor, pick out a baby, and just by a spray of chemical, the fire was out. Do you know the difference? One is technology, my brother. The other one is faith.
And the other one is also using the human mind to provide solutions
That's our problem
to
in this
issues.
country.
Okay, this conversation is becoming very interesting, and Yushau Aliu, economic analyst, has joined us. You've listened to what the other guests have been talking about, inflation's measures, the implications and all that. And bringing you into this conversation now, we begin to ask ourselves, like Dr. Okiongo is saying, that prayers, yes, we pray, but it cannot solve solutions. We have to wake up, open our eyes to the situation on ground and find the solutions ourselves. So how can Nigerians adapt to this inflationary environment, and what strategies as Nigerians can we employ to ensure that it does not affect our lives the way it is now? People just falling down and dying from stress of not being able to take care of just the family circle itself. Talk about more or less talk about the outside factors like going to work, transportation, buying food and all that. It's not a palatable picture that is being painted, actually, don't you think?
Adaptation to inflation is relative, and you must understand the economic environment you are operating. Before you adapt to a situation, you must prepare for that situation in the first instance. Inflation is necessary for growth. Controlling inflation is also necessary for development. These two factors are very crucial from the household management to the economic management. But however, macroeconomic ingredients are not mostly considered by household. These macroeconomic ingredients are mostly adjusted by policy measures. From 1990, the experience of Nigeria and the experience of the household in 1990 is similar to the experience of Nigerians in 2000, in the year 2020. When you the point I want to raise is a situation where you have a subsidy regime, and then subsequently you are not under subsidy regime. Nigerians were prepared for subsidy to go because their mind was prepared. Who is subsidizing who? So Nigerians now become interested that some people, few individuals are enjoying. So that is the misconception at the earlier stage.
Okay.
Misunderstanding the scenario before you adapt the situation. Now it is well understood that we all benefit from subsidy. But you can adapt yourself based on your income. This income is relative too. The income grouping also is very important for especially for a household to understand what he earns, because that's what determines his purchasing power. Your purchasing power always determines your consumption. But today, on average, nobody is saving anything.
Do Nigerians have the purchasing power now?
No. What I'm trying to say is that for a growth process to be sustained, you need to have an economic environment which households are saving. So now they don't save. That is -1. We have to understand that Nigerians don't save any longer. Now, what remains with them? Is it enough to feed them? No, it's not enough. So definitely for you to be adaptive in that situation, it cannot be possible. And that's why we have a similar case as pointed out by Dr. Ike. Do you understand? People fainting because you cannot adapt, because it has come sudden. Take subsidy regime back in 2023 in May, when inflation was 22.22, or on average in May when inflation was 22.41, and then take an economy outside subsidy regime in the same May, you are having an inflation that is 33.95. Now in between is a crisis cost of crisis, cost of living crisis of 11.54%. How do you adapt to that when your income has not changed? When your consumption pattern has not changed? It has changed dramatically, because if you are living, let's take, if you are to do cost of living index, let me take a bundle of goods, simple. Every household consume at least a meal a day. That's on average. And the cost of that, for instance, take rice. The cost of a measure of rice in 2023 May, and you take it in 2024 May, you now take the difference. Let me take, for instance, you are consuming an average of a family of 4. You are consuming a bag of rice that was costing 33,000. Let us be practical. And now suddenly in 2024, that same product is costing 99,000. And your income remain the same. Then how do you go out to tell Nigerians that you can be adaptive, and to tell the whole world? We fail to understand certain economic policies are not applied in all economies. Like I told you, the experience of Pakistan in managing inflation may not necessarily be the experience of Nigeria. The experience of Nigeria in 1990 may not necessarily be the same experience of Nigeria in 2024. In 1991, whatever we managed, there was subsidy in terms of inflation, and we had the worst inflation 1991, 92, 93, and 94 96. With the June 12 crisis. So if you can recollect what you faced in June 12 and then take 2023 what you are taking, there was labor unrest in that period. And the same thing applies, there is labor unrest. But the difference is that was a subsidy regime. And this one is not subsidy regime. And their income has been totally eroded. And not being totally eroded, you cannot fix. And the lifestyle has changed too. Do you understand? Because before now, professor can give you yam. This is just one out of a million who you can visit and see a farm in his compound and being a professor, and then still have the mind of giving you. The greater number of Nigerians that are living not in cities, in rural areas, cannot go to farm. That is not the same scenario in 1991. So a lot of factors, if you continue to bring out climatic conditions of previous Nigeria, it's not the same thing that applied today. The social economic environment is not the same. Nigerians today can be rescued if government want to rescue them so quick, because cash transfer can go in perfectly to change lifestyle. Like what Professor highlighted and my friend Adefulari. See, income is very necessary for any individual household to be adaptive to an economic situation.
So, sure, okay, thank you very much for laying your own foundation there. You also talked about cash transfer, but a lot of people have criticized the issue of cash transfer. How can it actually augment the suffering of the people here?
Cash transfer that was not efficient, cash transfer that is being biased, until we become proactive. What is the report from the EFC on cash transfer funds? Are they transferred? It is easy to transfer. On my way to this office, An individual called me at my gate. He wants to eat. Said there is a crisis. I said, okay, I am on my way. Please give me 2 hours. I can transfer little to him. If I can do that, what stops state government from doing cash transfer to communities? What stops local government from doing cash? Who told you it is only federal government that can do cash transfer? Because this revenue under Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission is being distributed based on an arithmetic formula. And this formula is working for the stakeholders. If it is working for the stakeholders, there is no way political fathers cannot extend that to the constituents of poor and deprived Nigerians, if I may put it. Because we are not supposed not to be feeding ourselves. Because the arable land, as postulated, former Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria lamented, Audiogbe, 90 million hectares of land lying fallow. Only 5% is being used. Then how do you comprehend policies of success in agricultural food production? And we must not check our production, we also check our trade policies. What is our balance of payment as regard to many products that we are consuming? I am always disappointed when emphasis is given on rice importation, blocking borders because of rice importation, but you cannot block your borders for PMS importation.
Okay,
Indeed,
Aliyu, thank
yes,
you very much.
Indeed.
Aliyu, Olamilekon, let me bring you into the conversation. Earlier on, you constructively criticized the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, and some of the policies of government. You feel that they are not actually helping, the common man. Exactly. Now, let's look at how is government's economic team now, because when this government came on board, everybody was jubilating because of the performance of the president when he was in Lagos, thinking that he would bring together a very sound economic team that will be able to rescue this our economy. But the economic team, do you think they are responding positively to this inflation crisis, and what measures do you think they need to take to mitigate the effects of this inflation on Nigerians?
I think let me first applaud that they are a good team. That's one, but their effort is not enough. Then two, since 1999, maybe doctor can bear me witness, Yusha is here, then Prof can also bear me witness. At every government, successive government that have existed since 1999, the common man has always been in their paper. But when it comes to practicalities of the policy, the common man is excluded. When Isha was talking about, when you mentioned of cash transfer, who are they targeting? The vulnerable individuals in our society. Just recently, Bank of Industry, Smidan, they are all giving out money. On the database of these agencies are millions of Nigerians who are registered. Guess what? Few people are getting the money. Meanwhile, it is billions upon billions that government are budgeted. Now, on the other aspect of the economic team of the government, they always have the poor people on their heart. But the problem is that the policy of the government in terms of economic implementation end in the middle. It doesn't get to the bottom. And why did it end in the middle? Our political recruitment processes hijack our economic policies. I will explain this. When Doc was made mention about local government and the rest of them, state governors, Yeshua also made mention, how come that when a political party gets into power, the economic policy of that political party, they think more of how to impact the people, but when it comes to distribution of this policy in terms of tangible economic principles, welfare for the people, it becomes a political or politicization exercise, whereby it becomes politicized. The welfare that the people are supposed to get, it doesn't get to them. You talk about the subsidy era that we have found ourselves. The federal government released 5 billion or thereabout to state government. They say they should buy rice, they should buy this, they should distribute to the people. But guess what? When they were distributing those processes, the people that first got to know about those distribution were the political members of these political parties who went to the secretariats to go and get. Upon the list that was produced, I followed the one in Nasarawa State, I followed the one in my state, Lagos State, and I discovered that it was just done in a way that to please the loyalists of the political parties. The same thing now goes into when policy is now done by the federal government through the economic team. Who get the contract? Who get the subcontract? Who get the MAU signing percentage and the rest of them? It all goes down to individuals who belong, who are associates of the government in power, who are the corridor of power. So when in goals, in aspiration, on policy blueprint, you target the people. But when it comes to distribution of these same resources, it doesn't get to them. So how do the people now believe in the government of the day? Another aspect of this economic team is this. Why is it that the moment government is formed in Nigeria, we have individuals who are affiliate? Apology to those who love the work of World Bank, IMF, and the rest of them. How come that it is individuals who are so much engrossed, who comes through that corridor, that we found advising this set of people in CBN, in Ministry of Finance, in every of the activities? Not that the advice are not good, but the advice is not something that will help us to be able to deal with the local and domestic economic problems. We made mention of Argentina. Argentina reduced the inflation to 4%. Go and find out what they did. They make sure that whatever advice that doesn't have to do with their homegrown market economic structure, they left it out. But here in Nigeria, we securitize our foreign reserve, we collect more loans, we listen to more of their activities in terms of what kind of MOU we'll be signing. Then how do you expect those policies to not translate in changing the life of ordinary Nigeria? It won't. Anyway, we have agreed that we are going to remove subsidy on fuel. But what about the palliative that the government promises? Where are the CNG buses? Where are the ease whereby Nigerians can have an ease of life through some of these policies? Apart from the minimum wage that Labour is fighting for. When the 5% or 10% of civil servant and public servant get their minimum wage, either 100,000 or 150,000, what about the ordinary people? What would they get their own minimum wage from? And we have suggested that one of the things that is making this agitation of minimum wage to come, because when Usha was talking, we're talking about the purchasing power of people, whereby the salaries remain stagnant. Now the salaries of public servants will go up. What about the ordinary people? What about the people in the informal sector that doesn't even collect salary? What about those of us that are consultants that are doing one or two things as a privately employed person by ourselves for ourselves? Like Prof here is employing himself for himself. Where will his minimum wage come from? So if the policy of government doesn't translate from that top to the bottom, there is no way the people can have a feel of government policy. So the economic team, they are good, they are laudable, but their policy is still disarticulated because it doesn't carry the people, it doesn't connect to the ordinary people.
So it's the implementation issues now that we're facing when it comes to the economic team. Okay, thank you. We'll pause you there. We'll take a break now. The conversation continues. Stay with us.
You're welcome back, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be discussing the rising implications of the rising inflation in Nigeria. Now let's bring in Professor Ango into the conversation again. He joined us via Zoom, and you've listened to everything the guests here in the studio have talked about, you know, the rising inflation, the implications, how it affects the common man, and what can Nigerians do to be able to adapt to the rising inflation. Now, my question to you is, what are the potential long-term consequences of sustained high inflation on Nigeria's economic growth and development? Let me have your take on that.
Okay, thank you. In the long term, if this is sustained, like one of the speakers said, of course, inflation is required, you know, for national growth or development. Inflation has to be at certain, if you like, levels, manageable levels. Now, in the long term, we will have a lot of challenge, especially we are one of the, if you like, international capitals of poverty currently. So that certainly will improve. You also ask a question to one of the panelists, which I think need to be answered, which has to do with the issue of coping. How do we cope? How do Nigerians cope in view of this situation that we have in the country? One of them certainly would be to, if you are not used to budgeting, then we have to budget. If you are used to budgeting, then you have to adjust your budget, to ensure that only those things that are necessary are the ones that you spend your money on. Now, one of the major costs normally is the cost of transportation. So it means wherever not necessary, we have to manage, and reduce our travels, reduce travels here and there within the town or across, or going to other places, except where necessary. And then perhaps maybe to combine this to do and this to do, put them together and have one trip instead. And then another thing is to actually diversify your income stream, ensure that you have more than one source of income. I think every civil servant knows this, because the current, wage level, amount that is being paid is certainly not sufficient to carry anybody. So people must have had other means, of income. Now, for the country, in the long term, to ensure that we resolve this problem, part of the solution is to ensure that we invest in production locally, and quality local production. We have mentioned the issue of power. Whatever it takes, we have to manage and resolve this problem. That is how this economy will grow. We have to ensure, and then I will advise the National Assembly in particular, perhaps to do what they did with the national, the recent change in the national anthem, to also quickly, copy, the attempt by the national legislature in the US did, in terms of controlling inflation. They came out with an act in 2022. Of course, a lot of the interventions, and they provided funds, about almost over $400 billion for government to intervene to reduce inflation. Now, but for them, they are intervening on energy and things like that. For us, we need to intervene in many other ways. Government has to build a huge, stock of reserves. Last time, if you remember, when we were talking here about food security, we mentioned the fact that government had released 46,000 tons or so of grains to ensure that they reduce the poverty. The shortage that was experienced. Now that helped. Imagine of 200 million, what would the system do? We know our capacity in terms of sales in the country is over 1 million tons. Government need to invest heavily, to stock our reserves, so that they will now use that anytime there is need. But I'm not suggesting that government should now go and import, abroad. No. Government should encourage and buy local, only where things are necessary that you buy them from abroad, because we will not be able to sustain this economy or helping other economies other than our own.
We are having some audio challenge there with Professor Ango, but thank you very much, Prof. For giving us some solutions there on how to cope with the present inflation rate in the country. You talked about Nigerians should come up, those who do not have plans before, they should now have a plan on how to cope, and also that we should invest more in local production. Now let me come back to Dr. Okengo here in the studio. Earlier on, you talked about our heavy reliance on importation, and that we need to do something about it. So how can Nigeria reduce its reliance on imports and promote local production to address the inflation?
Okay, let's take it sector by sector. First, for me, it will be food production. And please note that I didn't say agriculture, because they are not really the same thing. And for us to be self-sufficient in food production, the first demand is that we'll have the capacity to produce our seeds. Whatever seeds that we're going to be using, there has to be a national program for seed production.
Not the imported ones.
No. Because most of the things, if you're reading what's happening in social media, a lot of GMO, even the ones that are genuine are DNA locked.
Yeah.
A story of another day. You can use it once, but you'll never be able to use it again. So if it's going to be cowpea, cotton, rice, whatever. The second will be your support, programs, your insecticides, your pesticides, your fertilizers. Third will be, your technologies to be able to grow those seeds, not necessarily now using rain-fed. Remembering that there are countries like Israel, that are living in a salty place. The Dead Sea is salt, and yet they are able to produce the foods that are feeding, both themselves and their neighbors, friends, and foe. I went to Israel and I saw, what looked like plants growing out of the rock. I mean, they use that to wow you. But, me and my very inquisitive nature, I started edging closer towards, the rock. And I saw one very transparent tube. And what were they doing? Yes, it was inside the rock, but they had put in a drip. And that's what they call drip technology. Those technologies, this was about 15, 16 years ago, but they are off the shelf now. They are available. Demola, I said to you, if we had in every local government today, in very safe areas, let's start with Maiduguri, we had 1 million greenhouses in Maiduguri. Maiduguri people will launch this thing they do in Spain. They'll be using tomato to perform, that game. They'll bring tomato like they do in Spain, wear white and start stoning each other until the whole of the street is red and crimson. It is not tomato that they go to do through rain-fed. They do it by automation, by technology. Now, imagine the amount of jobs, 37 million, 3.7 million greenhouses we take if I just employing only 4 people. Take it from 300,000 to 37 million. Now, we go to the next sector. All right? Solid minerals. Now, it is touted that Nigeria has about 47, minerals. In fact, yesterday we saw pictures, of the Minister of Solid Minerals and the Executive Secretary of the PAGMI program, handing gold bars to the President. Now, what that means is that in just this very short, period, of a man who is determined to do the right thing. And what is the right thing? Comes to Lakon saying you must be able to not only look at your policy, but look at those policies being supported by programs and actions. Okay? Now, imagine again that for a place like Ajokuta that will be requiring 7.5, million metric tons of materials, to produce liquid steel in a year. That means that it can translate to at least 100 mines producing 100,000, 120,000, metric tons of good littered around these locations that have mining. Allocate 10 people, allocate 20 people, allocate 30 people to each of those, 100 mines in the 37 states or 36 locations across the states of Nigeria. How many jobs would they have created? Now, let us go to transportation. Look at CNG. CNG as a technology, Demola, has been on for the past 20 years. In fact, in America, which is the hub of technology, a lot of their cars have been running. Europe has been 60 or 30-something% of cars in Europe, have been running on CNG for more than 15, 20 years. Yet in Nigeria, we are flaring 2.2 million metric tons or cubic feet of gas on an annual basis. Flaring. And can I tell you what to do to flare gas? You will cap it. And you can now begin to build a gas network. That is how simplicity it is. Now, should I go ahead?
Go
ahead.
Now, you now go to your infrastructure. Look at Ajokuta. Everybody says, stop burning firewood. My wife is from Adamawa. My wife is a Haja's sister. The government of Adamawa had banned the use of firewood. So now there is no grass, for animals to eat in Adamawa anymore. Because they're no longer cutting firewood, they are now using Gara and every other thing, they can be able to see. Ultimately now also now promoting greenhouse emission. Imagine a situation where Ajokuta, as it is today, okay, is able to produce gas bottles, gas cylinders, and are able to produce about 60, 70 million of those gas bottles that you can actually share to people, you know, people in the rural areas. Okay, and they can now begin to either use, you know, the CNG or the methane, or from their latrines, or from their pit toilets, or from their animal residues, or from their farm residues. These are all solutions that have been proven, studies that have been conducted.
And it works.
It is working. Solutions have been involved in a lot of those things. Okay? Now, look at technology. I've just given you the story of Raw Materials Research Development Council. I don't even want to bring in Naseni. Naseni, you know, has produced lab, you know, microscopes,
Yes.
that are being used in labs in this country today.
Even
Imagine,
laptops.
thank you. At one time, me here, I had gone to the Ministry of Science and Technology. Then Mrs. Awoshika was permanent secretary. I'm saying this nationally. And I said, Madam, I can begin to produce laptops in Nigeria. And I used 2 of my children's names to be, and I had those laptops brought in. Why? Because just like HP, there are 4 major producers of laptop, you know, parts in the world. You want the motherboard, you want this, you want this. So all we need to do is to reverse engineer. This is where Naseni, you know, can be able to come in. Now, look at our fisheries. Like I told you at the beginning, imagine where we were, you know, committing just 60% of our dams, Ademola and Haja, to the production of fish. We start with Medugri. How many dams are there? We'll go to Sokoto. How many dams are there? We'll go to Castina. How many dams are there? Okay, we'll come to Nasarawa. How many dams are there? I'm not talking about irrigation now. I'm talking about us now using those dams, you know, to begin to now produce fish. Imagine where we are placing those greenhouses around those dams, and we are now just taking a little fraction of water, okay, to begin to now do, you know, the production of tomato, cabbage, greens, pepper, and all that. You will buy, when I served in Katsina State in the 80s, okay, there's a place where I served, was a border town between Nigeria and Niger. Way back in those days, if you buy a bag of beans, they will dash you 10. I didn't say 2.
You buy a bag.
They will give you 10. When I finish my service, I'm saying this, cross-check it. The brand, the choice of car in the north then was a climatizator. I bought a climatizator after my youth service. When I was racing the thing to my house, my father locked the gate and said they should go and call all my uncles that he didn't know he had given birth to a thief. But my saving grace was that my mother was part of my selling of my beans. I'm telling my story now.
Yeah.
Okay, as a copper, I started by 2, 3, 4, 5, and I was loading and I was sending to my mom to sell. And I had more than enough money. And 1 year after that, I was married.
And your father didn't know that you were selling this?
No, they didn't know what was going on.
With
It
your
was
mom.
me and his wife. So, you see, I'm trying to say to you that opportunities, if you don't understand this country, now what we do is, somebody was saying cash transfer, you know. Now, I say to you, I've been invited into a program in South Africa a long time ago on Sudan. And I kept saying to them, I have a little bit of a confusion here. And they said to me, what? I said, I can't see where the people are sitting. And the woman said to me, Dr. King, would I sitting on the ground? I said, that was the point. Now, if Israel can be able to, in the desert with salt, produce food, why are we not doing the same thing for Sudan? Why are we raising money to go to America to go and buy GMO for them? Ademola, the solutions are there. Let me not take all your whole time.
Yeah.
We're going to...
Olami, in 30 seconds, the solutions are there. So what is next?
I think Prof. Doctor made valuable solutions to this particular issue of inflation. But what I will really emphasize is still on the monetary aspect, as well as the fiscal policy, as well as the trade, and lastly, the responsibility of state government. If we fail to acknowledge that governors at the state have a role to play to bring down inflation, we'll still be missing it.
Okay, Aliu, let me bring you in here. We want to control inflation. Also, we want to ensure that we have economic growth. How do we balance the two?
You look at economic, macroeconomic parameters on ground. Like rightly pointed out, what are the issues that are triggering inflation in Nigeria? Removal of subsidy. How can we solve it? Oil, PMS production in Nigeria, it will solve the problem. That is one. Two, monetary policy. Why are we hacking MPR to attract investment when we know the economic environment is secured? We halt it because we are increasing cost of borrowing and you are making people to be out of job. So there is need for the central bank to not just look at the monetary policy to controlling inflation, but they should understand that the principal prime duty of the bank is to make an economic stable environment where prices are stable. Prices cannot be stable with the increase of MPR monthly.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's bring in Professor Yushau Ango for his closing remarks. People have talked about the monetary policy and how government needs to look into it. And some of our guests here into studio have also said the state needs to step up and help the federal government to move this country forward. Let's have your take, your last words in 30 seconds if possible.
Yes, certainly the states need to do that. In fact, we need to do something about the way we distribute our funds. Every month, the way the constitution is like every month, whatever is generated is brought before FAC and is distributed. We need, on a holistic basis, to be able to reserve something for the rainy day. So in that sense, the state governments, the local governments, they have to understand that we need to invest in key sectors of the economy. And to do that, we need the muscle. We need to protect our currency. We need to stabilize. We need to ensure that we encourage local production of whatever we do. As much as we do that, I believe there will be the future will be better for everyone. Thank you.
Professor Ango there. And let me get your last parting remarks, Dr. Okengo. The issue of inflation, we were still talking about it, and we want to grow our economy, just like I asked him. How do we balance it, the situation?
Develop new economic corridors that will now have common shared infrastructure so that you can now dot in what you call the state boundaries. Okay, a state that has land, can now produce. A state that has capital cannot add value. This is how you can actually bring in the subnationals. But if you're going to be letting them, because a lot of false boundaries have been created, okay, let us begin to look at Nigeria as land. The 90 million, hectares of land that Lekon had talked about, Yeshua, let us be able to now stretch it, okay, into products and value addition and allied infrastructure and job creation. And before you know it, you build a new social order where it does not matter, like it didn't matter when we were growing up. Okay, whether you were Yoruba or you were Fulani or you were Igbo or you were Nupe or you were whatever. Okay, all that mattered is that when people are held, when they develop relationships that are driven by economic considerations, they are, more stable as against any other thing that you can propose.
Okay, Dr. Emeka Okengo, development economist and farmer. As always, it's been a pleasure having your insight into this topic that we discussed today. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. Yushau Aliu, economic analyst. You came late, but you made very valid contributions to the yes. And Ade Folarin Olamileko, political economist and development researcher. Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing me.
I hope the states are listening too.
Yes, I really want to thank NTA for bringing me close to my two good friends, Dr. Yushau and Professor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Professor Yushau Ango, Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship. He's also Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academics, Kaduna State University. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that's Good Morning Nigeria today. Thanks so much for your time. On behalf of the crew, we say a big thank you for being part of the program. I am Juma Yusuf.
And I am Ademola Adeoye. Thank you for keeping us company and enjoy the rest of your day.